Okay, so welcome to Roger That Podcast. So we're the hosts, go ahead.
My name's Ava.
Daniela.
Aisha.
My name's Brianna.
My name's Sophia.
And
Thank you for having me.
so, and today, on Roger That Podcast, we have
Audrey Birnbaum.
and you wrote the book American Wolf. So, welcome. Thank you for coming. So, go ahead.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from?
Yes, so I'm a native New Yorker, and I live in Westchester County in Briarcliff, New York, and I'm a doctor. I did practice pediatric gastroenterology, which is intestinal disorders of children, and I stopped practicing in January of 2020, which by just sheer luck was just before the pandemic struck. But I think really because of the pandemic, I had a lot of time to focus on writing the book, which I started doing in March of 2020.
Oh, is that me? Okay. So, what inspired you to transform what your father wrote into a book about it?
So I didn't actually remember that my father had written his memoirs. He wrote them in 2013, and I had stashed them away in my attic, and I hadn't really tried to read them, but it was his story writing style was a little, I'll say dry. It was like some of it was like a little dull or very didactic, maybe would be the word I would put. And I had really hidden it away. And then in 2018, he passed away, and I was my sister and I were trying to write his eulogy, like a speech for the congregants who were there. And then my sister said, "Oh, we really should write a little. We should say something about his life story because it was it was a big story." And so my sister was like, "Yeah, we should write about the boat he took out of Portugal to get to the United States." And I was like, "No, I thought he took a boat out of Spain." And she was like, "No, it was Portugal." I'm like, "No, it was Spain." And we're like, "Oh shoot, we don't remember the details." And then my mother said, "Oh, well, he wrote it all down in his book. Don't you remember?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, it's a book somewhere." So we kind of pulled it out, dusted it off, and then I started reading it. And where it got to the part about his escape, it was just seemed like such an important narrative to tell the world. The story was, I've read Holocaust stories about concentration camps, but I'd never read anything about somebody's escape out of Europe. And I thought it was worth telling, but just not the way that he did it. It needed a different perspective, something that was more emotionally driven, character driven. And so my father thought that what he wrote was publishable as is, and so my mother kept saying, "When are you going to publish Dad's story?" And I was thinking, I can't publish it like this. I have to do something with it. So I just said, "Let me try and see what I could do."
Did he write it in a different language?
No, he wrote it in English.
So you didn't have to translate it?
I'd have to translate, but I had to fact check a lot of it. A lot of it was not accurate because he just did it from his memory. He just sat down and typed for 6 months. And not all of it was accurate, and even to this day, right now, it's being translated by a German translator, and she, being from Germany, said, there's this place where he talks about a chase by some BMWs when he was a spy in East Germany, and she said, there weren't BMWs in East Germany, and so we fact-checked it, and it turned out that there were something called East German BMWs that were made to look like BMWs, but actually were made in a factory that was taken over by the East Germans. So there were some things that he thought were true that weren't true. It's and so I had to make some corrections, and a couple of things I missed, and I'm still changing to this day.
Were you surprised to hear all the things your dad talked about, or did he tell you about this when you were growing up?
That's such a great question. So that was part of the problem my sister and I had, is that he had told us stories when we were so young, almost too young. Sometimes when we were growing up, we would watch Holocaust documentaries when I was 5 years old, and we would see bodies being dumped in mass graves, and things we should never have watched. It were really too disturbing. And then sometimes he would talk about his escape as if it was an adventure story, where it didn't have any emotional content at all, where you couldn't read the fear, where and then we got on a train, and then we would have to, at night, the train would have to go into hiding because, like it just, and the boat, and we didn't have any food, but it all, he would tell it as if he was excited about it. So we couldn't read the fear. And then we forgot it because he stopped telling it because he thought, story's been told, doesn't need to be retold. But all of a sudden we're, almost 60-year-old adults and we're thinking, we don't remember the details. So the answer to that is yes, we were told it, and then we stopped being told it and we forgot it. And we also were either too young to understand the emotion or he didn't share the emotion. When I reread it, I cried through it because I could feel the fear and also loneliness. There's a lot of loss, so much loss of people leaving, people departing, people emigrating, people dying, and then just tremendous loneliness.
Do you think you can tell us what your book American Wolf is about without spoiling it?
Yes. So I think, like I mentioned, well, I don't think you were at the thing. So first of all, the name American Wolf I chose because my father's given name was Wolf. He changed it to Jack when he got here. I can spoil it by saying that he got here. He lived, got here, so he lived. But it's a story about a family's living through the rise of Hitler in Germany, like right at the epicenter of Hitler and Nazism in Berlin. How one Jewish family starts to gradually lose everything. You feel the erosion of it. Little by little by little until they have nothing, until they're forced to flee. How late they fled, so he's living through all the indignities of being Jewish, and then also the war, and how they fleeing by the skin of their teeth. But the twist on the book is that I took it further and decided that I wanted to make it an immigration story too, because I felt like that was so relatable, because some of what he experiences as an immigrant to this country, facing prejudice, disorientation, lack of language, insecurity, being left back, all of those things are a general immigrant experience, which I felt was very relatable. And then the final twist is that he goes back to Germany, to the country that expelled him, that hated him, and he has to sort of face his identity, which is why I called it American Wolf. Because all the time that he was here, he tried so hard to become American. And he wasn't really accepted as an American, but he hadn't been accepted as a German. And he wasn't really accepted as a Jew anywhere. So it was sort of a crisis of identity. And he had to sort of find himself and who he was. And he never was really any of those things completely. So he just sort of ultimately embraced himself as a hybrid, never feeling comfortable in any of those shoes, and finding some kind of peace with what he had. But always being, I think, traumatized by all of it. That's where I could put it without giving all the details. But does that sound fair for those of you who know the thing? Okay.
What has been the response from readers, especially those with similar family stories?
You know what? I belong to the publisher of the book. Amsterdam Publishers is a specialist in Holocaust stories, and so I've read other people's stories, and I find that they're all so interestingly unique and fascinating. Stories of people who hid in Berlin, Germany, pretended to be Christian. Stories of people who gave away their children so that they'd be safe and then got them back only to be not recognized. Stories and these are stories of people not in concentration camps that have been told, stories of people who were in labor camps and escaped. They're so fascinating. So I want to say, among those people, when you say people had similar experiences, I think everybody's really interested in each other's stories in that way. Where I'm wow, I didn't know any of these things. This has really increased my understanding that my father's story is unique and yet not unique. Everybody's story is unique, and they're all very moving stories that also tell you how even when you live through a war or persecution, the trauma lives on, and it lives on with the next generation too. I think my sister and I feel like we suffered in a way because like our upbringing was not normal. Because my father had all these fevers and anxieties. Like he was always afraid to lose his family, so he held us very close. He didn't let us go away to college. There were a lot of. He was very quirky about money because he was always afraid that anything could be taken away at any time by the government. He's lived in fear a lot, so that it carried over. I hope that I didn't send that to my kids and that they're normal, but I don't know. You'll have to ask them. But as far as readers in general, it's really well received. I think because there's a lot of humor in the book. Because it feels very personal. Because it doesn't feel like it's sad, but it's and poignant. But it's also has that sort of. I mean, I try to infuse it with my own humor, which I don't think my father's story had as much. But it's his story, but it's also like my voice a little bit, and also because I knew my grandmother and my aunts and my father, and even my mother's side of the family, which is in the book. I knew all the characters and how quirky they were, so I was able to like color it with what I knew, and not just tell it straight from my father's perspective. Like it's a little bit of a merger of both of our voices. And the other thing that I find when I like give talks is that Jewish people are always asking me now. They're like, "Should we leave now?" Like there's a lot of anti-Semitism. I don't know if you heard about the news last night. In Washington D.C., like a Jewish couple was murdered in cold blood in D.C. Young Jewish couple that was about to get engaged, and so anti-Semitism has been on the rise all over the world. And so people are always asking me like, when do you know how to leave? When do you know? Because they always felt like people in Germany were too complacent. They didn't leave when the signs were out there. And they're like, how do you know? And it's like, you don't know. You just don't know. But I can see from looking at my grandparents, it was like how hard it is to leave. And how hard it is to adjust when you're middle-aged, when you go into a new country. It's really, really hard.
How did you approach writing about such personal and historical events from your father's life?
I really think I was really just very lucky that he gave me the roadmap. But I wrote it and rewrote it a lot of times. I tried writing it in the third person. I tried writing it in the present tense. I tried writing it in the past tense. I tried the first person. Like I did, there were a lot of iterations and writing and rewriting, and there were places also where like I felt like he didn't give me enough detail. So how do I write this when I don't have the detail? Like, and he would also like he would say things like, "Well, this is what my sister told me happened," but it wasn't a first-person account. So like the story of her and like when she went to England, when she was a nanny, and when she married the Chinese man Ho.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any first-person accounts, so to bring that to life and to give it color was really difficult.
Yeah.
So I just kept, and I have no professional writing skills except as a doctor. I write like consult letters and they're like, "Oh, your son has diarrhea. This is what we recommend you do." So it just, I just worked it and reworked it and reworked it, and I think I felt sometimes when I was writing, I felt like I was my father. Sometimes, like when I would write, I'd be like, "Oh, this is me," and I would talk about like my uncle, and I'm like, "No, it's not my uncle Siegfried. It's my father's uncle Siegfried." And I would sometimes get confused, and I would feel like I was living it in real time. Sometimes, like I would be like, I'm on that train track, and I'm saying goodbye to my uncle, and I would just, I would feel like I was there. And I think like that's what would happen, like why I think it came to life a lot. Like I felt like I would visualize it like a movie, and I would really see the scenes, like scene by scene. I would be, in his bed and hearing the bombs falling, or in the basement, something like I could sort of see it all happening. That's like it.
Yeah. So I know you said that when you were reading his memoirs that you said you cried a lot. But what was like the biggest challenge when you were writing the book?
The biggest challenge was for me as a non-writer to learn the trick, because I didn't have any guidance, like I've never taken a course in creative writing or anything. And so I had to sort of like teach myself the trick of writing to make a reader feel like they're there. And I think like I found like the trick, like, you know, like how suddenly like it clicked, like you get it, like how to bring a person into the story. So you're like, you know, they say sometimes like show, don't tell. Like don't say like, oh, you know, Ava? Which one's you? Ava. Okay, I'll say. Ava walked in. She had brown hair. Her eyes were a beautiful hazel. She was wearing an Ava necklace and a white sweatshirt. Be like, well, that's really boring writing, you know. Like, you know, there's a trick to how to describe things in the context of the writing. You know, that's where you wouldn't just like describe something like that. You would tell it from the person's perspective. You know, she sat down at the table. She pushed her long hair back. You know, she grinned from ear to ear as she pulled up her, as she held her thumb tight in her hands. You know, there's like a way where you feel like you're the person, and all of a sudden you feel like you are, even if it's not first person, you feel like you are Ava. And so I think sort of capturing that little shift in trick to feel like, sorry, I didn't mean to pick on you, to say like, oh, how do you shift it so you feel like, or like my father would say something like, this was our apartment. You walk in and on the right is Anita's room. It's really cold because there's no heat. The next room is the bathroom. The bathroom, here's the, I mean, he's great, he gave me detail. Here's the toilet bowl. There's the sink. This is what our tub looked like. This is what, and to take that and be able to like give that detail in the context of the story. That's what I really worked on, and I think I figured out how to make it work most of the time. And so I think when people read it, they said, "I feel like I'm there," and so I think that was do it to yeah.
What themes or messages do you hope your readers take away from the book?
That's a marvelous question. That's like a book club question. I'm a book club. That's what we ask. So obviously prejudice, you know, is such a big theme. The war and the horrors of war, the trauma, the multi-generational trauma of war, and the immigration and displacement, that's so general. I think there's a lot of family stuff in here about like there's a lot of personality issues that my grandmother had that I think made the family not strong in terms of dealing with some of the trauma that they encountered. I don't think that they were as supportive of each other as they could have been. And I think that one thing that I noticed was that because of my grandmother's personality, she was very like a jealous and insecure person. And so she cut herself off from more extended family members and community. And I felt like the importance of having community, especially when you emigrate, is so important. You know, so when you move to another country, to have other people that speak your language, that can support you, so you don't fall into depression and feel displaced, is like really extremely important. So I think I tried to convey that a little bit in my epilogue, or maybe something acknowledgments afterwards. I mentioned something called Ulysses syndrome, which is like a psychological term that was coined for a specific psychological syndrome that immigrants feel, where they feel like isolated and displaced and depressed. It's like just unique among immigrants, and I didn't know about it until after I wrote the book. It was actually a friend of mine who was one of my readers who told me about it, and I was like, oh, I didn't know that was a thing. But yeah, it's a real thing. And I think that's what my grandfather suffered from when he came here.
I bet writing the book like meant a lot to you, but were there any like particular stories or like moments that like really meant a lot to you?
I think again, without wanting to give like too much away, like the most emotional writing part for me was when he. So it's hard for me to talk sometimes without crying. It's like I'm very like I have like a button that you push somewhere and it like makes the tears come out. I think every time like I read, and when I was writing, when he's leaving Berlin and saying goodbye to family members, that really gets to me a lot. And I think I have a lot of separation anxiety. I have like a separation issue. So I think that's like one. And then issues with his father, like after he came here, and I don't want to give too much of that away, but some of his father's difficulties were really hard for me to read about. And I didn't really know how many losses he had when he came here. That was like new. That was really new to me, that he had lost 100 people after he came here. So I was like, wow, I can't believe how many people you've lost. I just didn't know. It made me understand a lot about my father that I didn't know. And then the other thing that was, even after I wrote the book, I did a lot of like genealogy searching, and I kept, my father did not know what happened to his relatives that he said goodbye to. He just said they got postcards that they had died. But he didn't have access to a computer, so he didn't know what happened to his uncle and his aunts and some of his other relatives and his best friend Heinz. And so now I had access to all these databases, like a Holocaust database, and I found out, that his friend Heinz had gone to this concentration camp called Theresienstadt and then Auschwitz, and I knew exactly how his relatives died, so I added that to the book, but he had no knowledge of that. So all of those things, as I found them out, they were very emotional for me to find out exactly what happened to them. And in a way, like I wish I could have told him, and I wish I could have talked to him about the book, but on the flip side, I knew that he never would have let me write this book the way I wanted to. He wanted to tell his story the way he wanted to. And so in that respect, I was sort of glad that he was not around anymore. Which is not the question you asked, but
I know that you said that this is also like kind of an immigration story, and that we do have a lot of immigration nowadays. So what advice would you give to those like reading your book that have this, like around the same family stories that would be able to know how to share it?
Yeah, I mean, I think just in general, I think like for kids to find out also about their family stories and their family history and ask their parents to write it down, because usually most people don't know like anything past their grandparents, if that. So I think that's just a good thing also just to do, especially when you're young and your parents remember. My mother's 90, she doesn't remember that much or doesn't know the details. Like her own mother was sick and she doesn't know exactly what she was sick with, and I'm like, oh, but did she have Cushing's disease? Or like, don't you know? So I think writing it down is really important, and usually if they have an immigration story, they have had some kind of difficulty and challenge and struggle, and maybe those struggles don't seem unique, but they're unique to the family, and they tell an origin story that's going to be important, like to you, to like why maybe your parents strove or worked particularly hard, or why their heritage from whatever country they're from is so important to them. It's usually like almost every immigrant family feels in some way they want to hold on to like their heritage is really important to them, while their children really want to become Americanized. So there's always like this battle, this push-pull between, the past and the future. And both things are important, but there's usually some generational divide between those two things. When my father came here, he wanted to become American, and my grandmother was saying, no, join join the Y because there's lots of German kids there and your German culture is so important. And he's like, I don't want to be German anymore because I'm being singled out. So that's like a very common story. I mean, I see it on TV shows all the time, whether it's a Korean TV show or an Indian TV show or, every culture. It's like always the same story. So I think it's just, that's why it's so universal, because there's always that. But then the thing that I kept thinking about is, I think a lot of like Americans say like, oh, when people come here, they should learn the language. And this is where I really softened on it. I was like, yeah, it's good to learn the language, but when you're middle-aged, it's really, really, really hard. I don't think my grandparents had access to something called like ESL or something like that. I don't think that existed back then. But also, again, that thing was like, you should be able to speak in your native language to your people from your community, because otherwise it's exhausting to speak in another language. It's so exhausting, and you need to be able to like relax and talk in Spanish or Arabic or whatever to your people. So you need your people around you who know like where you came from and can talk, feel like you're at home. Otherwise you just feel like a stranger. Because again, my grandparents were homesick for Germany because it was their home. It didn't matter that they had been expelled. That was their home. My father's homesick too. And they were like, what is this place? It has skyscrapers and steel, and they play jazz. And he came from a place where, the buildings were this high, and they played classical music. It was different. The food was different. So it was just, it was hard here.
And you said that you were a doctor, but when you first, when was the first time you wanted to be a writer?
Well, so you weren't in the auditorium. So I had a slide up that I thought I wanted to be a doctor from the time I was like 10 or 11. This is what I remembered, because now we know memories are often very skewed. But that's what I remember. I remember like maybe like 6th grade or something. But then my mother found this autograph book that I had from when I graduated from 6th grade, because our elementary school goes through 6th grade. And in the autograph book, I wrote down that I wanted to be a writer/musician. And I thought, well, that's news to me, because I didn't remember ever saying that I wanted to be that. I also in the book wrote down that I planned to go to Harvard, which did not happen. I had a few other like choice things in my book of things I thought I was going to do. So I guess I had a late start. So I did like to write when I was young, and I always could put words together, pretty, my grammar was good and everything. But I don't think I maybe did some creative writing, again in elementary school. But I was figuring that doesn't really count. Just like you could draw well when you're in elementary school, it doesn't mean you could be an artist. But because nothing was cultivated. Because once I did decide, I went to a Stuyvesant, which is like a science high school, and they're like a third of the class was saying they were going to be doctors, so everything else sort of fell by the wayside after that. And then I just thought, well, that's what I've always wanted to do. So.
What's your writing process like when you're writing down your stories and your thoughts? Do you plan out everything, or do you just start writing?
So I did start writing another book, and I had a mental idea of who my characters were and the general storyline, but not a specific outline. And then I just start writing, and then a lot of times, and I think you'll hear other writers say this as well, the characters sort of speak for themselves, they become like real people, and because they have a certain personality, they have a style of voice that speaks. So then sometimes you go into this thing called flow, where you become unaware of time. Artists have this also. If you're unaware of time and space, you're in your own movie in your head, and you're in the scene, and then the characters are talking to each other, and they're doing things, and stuff is happening, and they just start doing it as if they're their own people, and they have their own personalities and voice, and sometimes they'll do something that you haven't planned on. Maybe they'll kiss, or maybe they'll steal something, or maybe and it'll be completely within character. But you're like, well, I didn't plan that, but they did. And you're like, they? Who are they? But it's sort of as if you have a fantasy in your head, you might a daydream or something, and they might do something you didn't plan on, but it's coming from you, but yet somehow it's as if they're leading their own lives, if you can sort of imagine that. It's kind of weird, right?
When you were writing it, did you have to take like, were you able to just get everything out into that, like, one time period when you were writing it down, or did you have to, like, stop and, like, take breaks?
I just don't take breaks. Sometimes it was too emotional, or sometimes, like, I'd forget to eat because I was in that flow, and I'd just be like writing for hours, and it felt like no time passed at all. And my husband would be like, Audrey, you have to make me dinner. He's an old-fashioned guy. Make me dinner. So no, I'm just kidding. He's not like that at all. But yeah, no. So I would forget to eat myself, and I would be like, oh my God, is it dark already? It's. But then sometimes some days would go by and I didn't write at all. This wasn't a job for me. Like I was like, I have to write from 9 to 12. It would just be like I would write and then I would not. And then sometimes I would like write in my head, like I'd be in the shower and I would think about like a part that I thought, well, I think like this section when my dad had the measles, like it's just kind of thin, it's weak, it doesn't like really say anything. I need like more drama. So something that just brings it to life. And I would think about it in my head, and then I'd come back downstairs and I'd write it, or I'd do that sometimes on the street outside. I'd come back and write it. So I was like thinking about it a lot, even when I wasn't actively writing it. Which I do sometimes, like if I'm going to give a speech or something. Like sometimes I do it in my head, and then I go and write it down. Like it's a lot of times working things out in my head.
How long did it take you to write American Wolf from start to finish?
So I think I wrote it probably in the course of a year, from start to finish, and then I put it out to get an agent. Like you do these things where you write like what they call a query letter to see if you can get like a book agent to then bring it to a publishing house. And during that time, and I wasn't getting any positive responses. And I put it aside and I said, before I try again to put it out letters to other agents, let me look at it again. Maybe it needs like to be rewritten. And so I spent like another few, maybe 4 or 5 months, I'd say, doing what I was saying then, like taking parts of it that I thought were like, I think I could write this better. And I reworked it and improved it and did some editing and something. I did my own editing. I did have some friends read it, but most of them didn't really read it critically. They were like, oh, it's so good. They were just being nice. And I had maybe like 1 or 2 friends who read it and were a little more suggestive of doing some things. But for the most part, I edited it myself.
So when writing the book, did you have like a favorite place or like time to write it?
Yes, I on my couch in my living room on a laptop, not in like a formal like desk. In the corner.
Did you kind of just write when you got like those thoughts, or did you just like did you only write when you had like time, or like did you kind of just like
Procrastinate.
like write like?
Yeah, at the time I was like really in it, so I was pretty much like writing every day. Yeah, most of the time, unless there was something specific that was taking me away. And remember, it was the pandemic, so there wasn't a lot of. I had retired, and I had this plan like I was going to do ballroom dancing, and I was taking an art class, and I was in a chorus, and then everything disappeared. It all went away, and so all I had was time, and so this was what I did. So there was time. I had lots of time.
Yeah.
I also sat on way too much.
So
I atrophied.
So your book, it inspired many young kids, especially in our school. So what advice would you give a middle schooler who wants to become an author?
Your questions are all so good. I did a lot of podcasts, and the questions were so much not as good. It's really bad English as this. I think that they always say write what you know, and I think that's like always the best advice. Start with something that you're really comfortable with, something about yourself or about something. I mean, you don't have to put yourself as the character, although that's fine. But it's I think, or start. Sometimes I did do some practice things on my own. I guess even before I decided to write this, where I would just sit down on my porch sometimes and I would write about, I would describe just something that was happening, that I could see, the birds, the sky. I would just describe a scene and see like what I could make of it. Could I do a good description of it? Just a paragraph. Um, or describe a dream you had. And then try and make it, the language as colorful as possible. And then I think what I was trying to talk to Ava about, where you'd be like, describe this, like something that just happened to you. But see if you could describe it in a way that feels like it would be something you would want to read. Make it like interesting. And see if you could focus on a character, because the thing that I see, that I think the weakest thing that I see when I see people who don't know how to write is they don't focus on a specific character, so they flit around from things to things. This person's this, that person's this person is that. And you really want to be like, a reader wants to read about a person, what they did, what their thoughts are. And so if you get into the habit of doing something like that, talk about the gentleman who's running through this, talk about him and how he got everybody in the room and what did he say and how did he make you feel at ease, and describe something like that. So any exercise like that is just a good exercise for the idea, the style of how you write, and make it fun or interesting or funny. How do you make it? It's not what you first write. What you first write is going to be garbage. Okay? It's what you rewrite and rewrite. It's like when you draw. It's like the first thing you draw, then you shade it and you color it and you erase it and you work it and you work it, and then you're like, oh, now it looks like an apple, but not at first. So I think of it also as like, don't judge. First put it down and then refine it until you read it and you're like, oh, that's not bad, until ask ChatGPT to do that.
Okay, so we're finishing up here, but I have a quick question, because I know I'm not very passionate about like when I have to write something for school, but when it comes to something that I'm very passionate about, I'm really excited to learn about, I like to write a lot about it. So was that something that you were really passionate about, or was it something like you felt you had to do?
Well, my mother kept bugging me, and I really wanted to shut her up. No, I'm just kidding. No, I felt passionate about this. I felt like I mean, some of it was like a personal challenge, like, could I do it? Could I make it good? And some of it was like, I was like, I think this is a good story, and I think it's one worth telling, and I felt like also because it was about a child, like, because he was just a kid, I was like, and I wanted to tell it, I mean, I'm a pediatrician, right? I wanted to tell it from a child's perspective. What would it feel like to be a child going through this? Could I give it a child's voice? Which I thought I could do maybe because I knew what a child's voice would sound like, maybe, as I grew up. So I did feel pretty passionate about it. But the other stuff that I'm writing isn't serious, but it's still, it could be about anything, like a trip you took, but you can still infuse it with like your voice about things that you do feel passionate about. Like you could write a story that's about, again, nothing like this, but then you can talk about your own feelings and be passionate about how you feel about something and infuse that into your writing about something that could be very mundane, very like, whatever, I ran a race, I went to gym yesterday, but in that you could be talking about a relationship or how you feel about your mother, whatever, like somehow it can make its way into something, like something you really care about inside something that could be very small.
Okay, to end this off, where can our viewers go if we want to learn more about your book and story? Would we be able to reach out to you in any way?
Well, so first of all, I do have a website. It's audreybirnbaumauthor.com. And then I have a YouTube channel, so a lot of my talks and podcasts are on there. I did a long talk at the Ronald Reagan Library in California. That was one of my bigger talks, so I think that's on there. And I will happily give you my email address if anybody wants to reach out to me. I'm delighted to if anyone has any questions. And no, that's fine. And I have an Instagram and Facebook and all the usual stuff. So I'll leave you with all of that if anyone wants to reach me. I'd be delighted to. I'd be delighted. If anyone has any questions about becoming a pediatric gastroenterologist, writing, how I eventually got it published, and a little more.
Okay, so we want to thank you for coming on
Thank
to
you
our
so much.
podcast,
You guys are
like
great.
sharing your story, your father's story, expanding on that. And, we truly are happy to have you here and had spending your time here. So,
The pleasure, totally, 100% mine. You guys are amazing, really amazing. I can't believe what you've done
thank
at
you.
such a young age. I know you guys don't feel young, but sometimes of me. No, really, really wonderful questions. Thank you so much. I'm right on your board.
Yeah.
And
So thank you for coming.
thank you.
Cheers.
Okay.